Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries and relevant to you, the viewer. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer of over 25 years experience. With me tonight I've got a very experienced work cover lawyer, John Karantzis, partner in a law firm.
Hi Tony, hi Viv, hi viewers.
And Vivian Ryan, ex-lawyer, come marketing expert, guru, you name it.
Whatever you want to call me, Tony.
How are you, Vivian?
Hi, Tony. Hi, viewers. John?
Viewers, tonight we're going to be talking about the plight and rights of firefighters. Peter Marshall, United Firefighters Union, will be joining us, so please stay tuned for Peter.
However, before we get to that, Tony, what's in the news?
John, there's been a lot of interesting stories. I love this one about bigger bucks for buyers. Harassment payouts are on the rise.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about some of the examples,
yes.
John.
Tony, employers must be on notice. Any employee that suffers sexual harassment or discrimination at the workplace can make an application at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, and they will suffer a payout, Tony.
Well, or they can go to Fair Work Australia as well, which
Exactly.
is federal legislation.
Oh, yes.
Have you got a good example for you? What about a beauty consultant, Russian origin? She got $2,000 because her boss allegedly told her at the end of her probation that she was sacked for being the wrong ethnicity.
Well, this is concerning, and obviously all employers need to be made aware that their actions are basically they've got to be accountable. And a lot of small business owners actually don't know what the laws are, but it's the onus is on them to really charge themselves with the knowledge. But my question to you guys as lawyers, how would they quantify a $2,000 compensation claim?
Viv, it's almost a token amount for pain and suffering, for the experience of what the claimant has suffered. I mean, we got other stories of payouts up to $25,000 for sexual harassment. Now, you're trying to quantify something that, the victim has experienced.
And why do we think that these sorts of complaints are on the rise at the moment?
I just think that that's probably the easiest access to justice these days. And it's very hard to access justice under the Victorian Work Cover Act, John.
Exactly. And also people are more aware these days, aren't they, Viv, of their rights, that any form of discrimination, racial, sexual and physical, well, you can make a claim.
And equally, I think pregnant women, their level of complaints is on the rise as well in the last 12 months too. So a lot of women who are, finding out they're pregnant are reluctant to tell their employers because they're being faced with, being passed over for promotion, not getting involved with certain activities and projects. I mean, this is a real concern in our day and age because we want to keep populating the country, but at the same time, women are putting in a very precarious position because by virtue of the fact that they're the only ones that can carry children. So, it's something that we all, I think, need to be educated on, males and females and people within the workforce.
And Viv, there's also examples of race issues, like an Indian woman complained to the commission that she and 4 Indian friends were denied entry to a city nightclub because of her race.
This is very common. It's common. I mean, whether you're of a particular ethnicity, if you're not the right size, not the right shape, not the right age group, you don't have the right look. I mean, this happens all of the time, especially with the new nightclubs that are always opening up in Melbourne.
I would have thought, John, that if it's a work-related situation, you're better off to go under the Fair Work Act, which is a Commonwealth legislation.
Exactly.
The rights are a bit higher.
Exactly.
Unlimited damages.
Unlimited damages, yes.
All right, let's keep moving. Payout for union rep, Viv. This fellow here, he was a whistleblower. He came out and said the particular company he was working for was inappropriately disposing of asbestos. John, what are the facts?
The NBN, he's a whistleblower regarding the NBN and the way asbestos was dealt with, Tony. Yep. Now, the employer Well, they came down hard on him. It was a claim for constructive dismissal, Tony, as in the actions of the employer amounted to his dismissal. He won.
Yep. And do we know what he got?
It was confidential.
It was a confidential settlement. However, it just shows, Tony, that again, employers, they have to do the right thing. Yep. They can't be heavy-handed with employees, especially this type of employee who was a whistleblower.
Well, he was putting, basically the public safety was at risk, which is why he let the cat out of the bag, if you will. And ultimately, the employers just tried to cover it up. This employee came out of a place of concern for the greater public, and he basically lost his job over it.
Exactly.
So, the message again needs to go out to employers, no matter what size you are. I think, this NBN rollout, I don't know whether it was Telstra who were involved in this.
I felt part of it.
But ultimately, you need to be put on notice.
Exactly.
But Viv, the thing that's concerning is that it's happening more and more often. And what about the person that complains? Are they at risk of not getting a job in the future? Is that what the public's concerned about that?
Well, arguably this
Unfortunately,
is a
they are at risk.
A widow, she loses her rights to compensation because the dentist she sued, John, is bankrupt.
It's a very odd case and very sad case, Tony. We've got a doctor who's an unregistered doctor. Is treating. Now, the lady's put $10,000 towards her treatment. It's all gone up in the ozone, Tony.
Well, isn't
Literally.
she's a widow of a terminally ill patient, basically, who was promised a particular methodology of being able to treat her partner from cancer. Almost, there's a lot of these types of
He's a witch doctor.
doctors out
quacks,
there.
yes.
Yeah. And it was a landmark case where they were awarded compensation payout for false misleading, and I think it was unconscionable treatment of her partner. And this dentist now has then claimed bankruptcy, so the widow is now not entitled to any form of payment, which is a real tragedy. And unfortunately, it happens a lot, though.
But why? Lawyers cannot practice if they're bankrupt, John.
Exactly.
And they need insurance.
Oh, yes.
And doctors obviously can practice.
It's a very odd situation.
I don't think it's appropriate.
But the problem is they're playing on vulnerable patients. At this point, they've lost, all resolve. They're looking to cure themselves of a terminal illness, and so they come to these doctors in the hope that they. And in fact, I think the actual it was called a hope treatment. So there's no scientific evidence to suggest
one of the
that this was
treatments
going
he
to work.
got was having
Ozone
gas delivered into his rectum. That's outrageous.
Yeah, but it just goes to show you people will do anything when they're fighting for their lives.
No, Consumer Affairs took the case, Tony, under misleading and deceptive conduct provisions.
She won and she's going to get nothing.
That's
exactly.
right.
Oh, I mean, that's the bottom
And
line.
then we talk about psychiatric trauma like we were talking last week with the TAC claims. These are lots of things.
Hey, Viv, this is up your alley. Tell us about the protest dummy spit.
Oh, this is really...
Police suit over a horse dribble and swollen foot.
Well, we're up in arms. The community's up in arms. This happened back in 2011. Essentially what's happened, there was a group of protesters at the Maribyrnong Immigration Detention Centre. One of those protesters is now suing a constable who was riding a horse because the horse dribbled on this protester
stepped on his foot
and
too.
also stepped on his foot. So the community is up in arms because taxpayers' money is going into actually
into this court
into
proceeding.
This particular case. But my question to you is, was there contributory negligence? Because when there are protesters around horses, they're going to dribble on you.
Or
They might step on you.
But Viv, did the horse come after the protesters? Because realistically...
And do we sue a horse?
Oh, you got to...
Well, why isn't the horse being named in the writ, Tony? Didn't the horse actually cause the problem here? No, I think the lawyers are negligent, Tony.
But this is where our taxpayers' dollars are going. I mean,
exactly.
Viv, okay.
The whole case is
that fellow
ludicrous.
that was dribbled on, what about the poor bloke that the horse fell on top of him and he suffered a fractured collarbone?
Look at this.
That's pretty nasty.
It is nasty.
They're nasty injuries, but at the same time, Tony, these protesters are putting themselves in an event where they know
knowingly, yes,
fully well what they're doing and that they may be injured.
Yeah, but by the same token, the police can't come out there heavy-handed.
No, of course not.
Or,
of course not.
have their horses tread all over them or dribble over them and fall on top of them.
I'll be interested to see what the evidence of the horse is in the courtroom, Tony.
Viewers, we've got to go to a sponsors break. Viv, thanks for coming on board. Stay tuned. Get you on board in the future. We've got Peter Marshall after the break, viewers, so please stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the plight of firefighters. Viewers, welcome back to the show tonight. We're very fortunate to have Peter Marshall. He's of the United Firefighters Union. Good evening, Peter. How are you?
G'day, Tony.
Peter, you've been a firefighter all your life?
I have for 29 years.
And you're a life member of the Firefighters Union?
That's correct.
So you've been a firefighter for as long as I've been a lawyer?
I think
so. You and I deserve a medal, I reckon. Peter, to kickstart this show, tell us the plight of a firefighter. If they go to a normal house fire, what are they exposed to?
Well, a normal house fire is 1,000 degrees Celsius. Nothing special about that house fire, but it's 1,000 degrees Celsius. On top of that, a normal household has 70,000 synthetic chemicals. When a firefighter goes to fight a fire to rescue someone, they are confronted with a toxic soup. And that's our problem. Now, the community don't realise this, but there's nothing special about that fire. A normal house fire, what's in the products contained within that house, will ultimately affect the life of the firefighter.
Peter, when you say toxic soup, what do you mean?
Well, there's 70,000 synthetic chemicals in a normal household. When you combine that with combustion, there's a carcinogenic material that's actually given off by the fire. It's not just one chemical, it's not just one carcinogen, it's a combination of different ones which come to a chemical soup.
And that's all in the fumes?
All in the fumes, and it's unavoidable. The only way that a firefighter can avoid that is simply not go into the building, which is directly opposed to what firefighters are about.
John, there was an amendment to the Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act federal legislation, yes. 2011, introduced by the Adam Bant, the Greens member. Yes. Now, the key element to that amendment is Section 7 of the Act says that there's a legal presumption if a firefighter has been employed for a certain period before being diagnosed with certain types of cancer, the employment is taken to have been the dominant cause of a contraction of that cancer.
It's a great development in law, Tony.
Well, the most recent example that you and I are aware of is Fiskville.
Yes.
How many people were affected there that you're aware of?
Thousands, Tony, thousands.
Okay.
Now, the Commonwealth legislation has reversed the onus. Now, the worker, as in the firefighter, does not have to prove on the balance of probabilities that their injuries, and usually it's cancer or some form of cancer, are work-related. Now, it's presumptive that the cancer they have contracted, for if they've been working for a minimum of at least 10 or 15 years in most instances, is now related to that work, and they're entitled to compensation for that.
Peter, there is a schedule of cancers
Yes.
listed in the legislation.
Yes.
5 years will give you a primary site brain cancer.
Correct. All the cancers that were listed in the federal legislation are underpinned by science. For example, one of the studies is the LeMaster study. That's 120,000 firefighters. It's a meta-analysis of 52 different studies. 2 of those studies are Australian. On top of that, there's just a recent NIOSH study. It's come down with 30,000 firefighters involved. All those cancers are shown to be accelerated levels within firefighters as opposed to other occupations.
And can I ask you this? They tried to introduce the bill that the federal parliament passed into the Victorian parliament, and it was defeated, Peter.
We don't understand why the Victorian government has taken that stance, and indeed firefighters are very disappointed for this reason. It's the union's view that this matter should not be politicised. Can I say the Federal Parliament of Australia unanimously endorsed the federal legislation. There was no politics involved in it. The Western Australian government, which is a Conservative government, has actually just proclaimed legislation for firefighters in Western Australia, as has the Tasmanian government. We do not understand why the Victorian government is not taking the same approach to looking after their firefighters as those other governments.
So, Peter, we've got a situation where in the Victorian state government, the Greens a couple of months ago now, Tony, in early 2013, introduced into Parliament, again, the reverse onus legislation. That basically that firefighters that contract cancers and they've been working for a minimum period of time, well, it's presumed then that that cancer is related to their work as a firefighter.
Yes.
Now, the government didn't support that bill and they lost by
two
votes, Tony. Again, Jeff Shaw was in the play there. Tony, what do you think is behind the government's reasoning here?
Look, recently we had the change to the Transport Accident Act, which made it very hard for people with psychiatric injuries to get common law damages. I mean, obviously, it's pretty clear in my mind that the Victorian government, Liberal government, isn't interested in people being compensated for injuries.
Well, their actions show that, don't they?
Well, I don't know.
Those recent changes you talk about, Tony and John, they directly affect firefighters, they directly affect ambulance officers and police officers, because the way the changes are prescribed, we are not caught by the legislation. In fact, our rights are being extinguished. And let me tell you, it's on a daily basis that firefighters are involved in cutting people out of motor vehicle accidents. Ambulance officers are involved. And if they suffer a psychological illness, with these changes, they're no longer able to be compensated.
Well, Peter, the Minister would have you believe that that's not the case.
Well, it is the case, and we've had that on very good legal advice as well as analysis. And in fact, we've had discussions with people within government who have confirmed that it is the case.
John, I'm looking at this list, okay, and the thing that really surprises me, and I'm actually flabbergasted, that a primary site brain cancer and a leukemia have only got a 5-year qualifying period. That sounds to me that being a firefighter is a pretty dangerous occupation.
It's a dangerous occupation. Peter, you could tell us a lot more about that.
It is a dangerous occupation, but the firefighters don't seek accolades. They don't go about telling the public what they do. In fact, they don't tell their family when they finish their shift. But firefighting is very dangerous. What we are so gratified is that the Senate of Australia, the Parliament of Australia, recognise that firefighters forego quality and quantity of life in protecting the community. And it's because the accumulated exposure, it's not just one exposure. Every fire that they go to, they're confronted with this toxic soup, and it is an unavoidable risk.
Peter, you've got 3,000 Victorian members, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And of the volunteer brigade, what are we talking?
Talking up to around 50-odd thousand, maybe 17 to 20,000 who are active.
Okay. After the break, viewers, we've got to go to a sponsor's break. We're going to have a look at one of these suits that a firefighter wears to try and protect themselves against all these cancers and other conditions they can contract. So please stay tuned. Viewers, welcome back to the show. Before the break, we're talking about the situation of firefighters. Peter, Fistville is a very interesting case. There's been tens of thousands of people trained out of there since the 80s.
Correct.
And there's been a register set up of people who have contracted cancers and other diseases who have worked at Fistville. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not just those who worked, who have also attended. So many members of the public would have actually trained there, as have many volunteers, Tony.
Okay. Now, this legislation, if passed, would have assisted those people, correct?
Well, one of the tragedies of the state government not passing the legislation is the former chief officer of the CFA, Brian Potter, very distinguished man who's given his whole life to public service, has multiple different types of cancers. he blew the lid on the fistful situation because it was known they were using material that could potentially and has caused cancer as part of their training props up there.
John, would it surprise you that in Edmonton, the fire chief brought over a study of the pre-amendments, post-amendments, claims, and what were the results, Peter?
Well, the results were this. What was put against us, this would cost the community a lot of money. So the chief from Edmonton brought out actually workers' compensation figures prior to the legislation being introduced over there and after. And there's very little cost. In fact, there's savings because there's a whole educational process, Tony, that goes with this. There's an awareness. There's new procedures put in place. But I will underpin that by saying it is an unavoidable risk.
Okay.
And Peter, these laws, they're international, aren't they?
Absolutely, they're international. In North America, in particular the US, we have, I think it's 50 of the 52 states have this type of legislation. In Canada, there's 8 out of the 10 provinces. Australia is the only country outside North America. But as we speak, this legislation type of legislation is gaining momentum around the globe. So the European Union is in 2 countries are looking at this legislation.
So every firefighter in most of the states in America are covered by this type of legislation, and Victoria isn't.
Correct, and most importantly, Tasmania firefighters, Western Australia firefighters, and even in Victoria, firefighters at the airport, at Tullamarine and Avalon Airport, are covered by the legislation, federal legislation, but the Victorian firefighters fighting the same fire next to them have not got that cover.
And this is due to the act of the Victorian Liberal government, Tony.
Absolutely, fairly and squarely on their shoulders.
All right. You've tried to improve the safety of your members, and you've got this jacket that they're wearing these days.
Correct.
I've tried it on, it's very heavy. This jacket, what's it weigh?
I'm not sure of the exact weight, but what I do know is the protection it affords firefighters. Tony, this will protect a firefighter up to 1,000 degrees Celsius if the firefighter's engulfed in flame. But one of the problems, the inherent problems with firefighting is simply this. Firefighters' metabolic heat build-up, John, it gets very hot. And unless that heat build-up, metabolic heat build-up is released, their major organs will cook and they'll perish very quickly. So this jacket actually breathes. It protects them from radiated heat, but it also releases their own body heat. Therefore, anything within a structure fire will leach into the skin of firefighters, and therein lies our problem. It is an unavoidable risk. You cannot fully encapsulate a firefighter in a structure fire.
John, the mask they wear, do you know how long they can breathe with the mask?
Peter, tell us, please.
It depends on how fit you are and also how hard you're working, but it's up to around 40 to 45 minutes. You've got a positive pressure air supply. And the reason you have a positive pressure air supply is if the mask breaks, it means nothing can come in. It actually pushes it out. So the breathing apparatus, it's not the inhalation's our problem, it's the absorption through the skin.
Can I ask you this? Of all the firefighters that are training today, are they aware of the risks and all the extra hazards that they're exposed to as opposed to the average person in society, Peter?
After the Senate inquiry, there was a whole awareness happening about this exposure, an unavoidable risk. Before that, I think firefighters knew, but they didn't want to think about it. And what they want to do is just be protected and make sure their families looked after if they get ill from protecting the community. That's why this legislation is so important. The Senate inquiry actually asked the very question you're asking. Has there been an awareness, and do you tell recruits or applicants when they apply of these dangers? And fire services do not. It'd be interesting to see whether there's been a drop-off on the recruiting applicant numbers as a result of this awareness.
John, if anyone's in a predicament like this, especially you've encountered the Fistville people,
Oh, yes.
what should they do?
Tony, anyone injured in the course of work, apart from seeking appropriate medical advice, they're entitled to workers' compensation and benefits. Under the laws in Victoria at the moment, Tony, you need to prove on the balance of probabilities that you have suffered injury arising out of the workplace. Now, it's going to be difficult in regards to these issues where cancer is involved, but at the same time, it's not, a claim can still be made.
Well, weight of numbers, I would have thought that if you haven't got a presumption working for you, you'd bring along other members that have got serious illnesses.
Exactly.
And you'd think a judge would be pretty understanding of a
We act
person's
for
plight.
quite a few Fiskville claimants at the moment, Tony, and we're building the case.
Peter, you're keeping a register for Fiskville. What's going to happen eventually? Class action?
Well, like there's an admittance that the duty of care to the public and their employees and volunteers was breached. I wish the matter would just be resolved by the CFA and the state government rather than drag people through a protracted legal process, because people are dying, and that's not dramatising this. People are actually dying and have passed with cancers that fall within the science.
Viewers, this is a good time for you to send us your Facebook and Twitter comments about what should happen. Should the legislation be passed or shouldn't it? Do you believe that the firefighters should be looked after? I mean, it's not as if they're after special privileges. Bottom line, the literature suggests and the science that the exposure is so much higher than the average person in society. Isn't that right, Peter?
That's right. These studies are not small studies. 100,000 firefighters, 60,000 firefighters. There is no argument within the scientific community. We just want the legislators to put the protection in.
And John, what do you think's happening?
Tony, the government, Liberal government, has now announced a firefighters advisory service.
Which means
Peter, what's that?
The union's position is that it's simply a cheap political stunt.
Peter, one of the aims that the government have stated that this service does is to guide the worker through the process for making a claim. Well, we would say, and I'm sure the union would say, no, you're better off seeking medical advice and seeking the advice of a lawyer.
Yeah, you'd want to get qualified expertise in this, wouldn't
Exactly.
you? Yeah.
I probably can't express how disappointed we are in this board, because it has no substance.
Peter, this is a big topic, and there's also the issue of climate change. We'll have to take it up in the future. I really want to thank you for coming on board. John, thanks for coming on board.
Thank you, Tony.
Viewers, thanks for watching the show. Go to our Facebook and Twitter. Go to past episodes. Stay tuned for future episodes. And always remember to stay safe.